You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's ministries. You'll never be the same.
Welcome to Nicholas Hood III Ministries, a ministry of hope, spiritual inspiration, personal power guided by Christian love. May the power of God's Holy Spirit fall upon you as you sit back and enjoy today's program. I introduce you now to Pastor Nicholas Hood III.
Today I want to talk about a secret for having a successful life. Simply be patient, be positive, be focused, and whatever happens, never ever give up. Be patient, be positive, be focused, and whatever happens, never ever give up. You know, in every life, there are tests, and the tests are age appropriate. Sometimes, unfortunately, a child is thrown into war. That is not appropriate. But some children have to deal with that. They're children who had to endure slavery. They're children who've had to endure sexual abuse. You know, that's what we're hearing about now in this whole Jeffrey Epstein files. The abuse of children. It's a terrible thing. But everybody suffers tests. You know, I think about the different experiences I've had in life. When I was a child, there were things that terrified me. Sometimes it was the tests that teachers would give out on Fridays or Monday or Tuesday or whatever day the test was given. Sometimes that was a stressful moment, but you had to live through it. You know, if you are a child and you're confronted on the playground by a bully, that is a test. When you get a little older and you start finding attraction in the little girls or the little boys, in trying to figure out, how do I talk to this person? That is a test. When you're playing sports and you're trying out for a football or a baseball or basketball team, that is a test. Everything is a test. I remember learning how to drive at Mumford High School at 17 years of age. They had a driver's training course there. That was a test. And then after I passed the driver's training test, I had to go before the Secretary of State down West Outer Drive in Detroit, Michigan. Somebody looking at this knows West Outer Drive. And that was a test. And I flunked the test because I didn't turn on the lane changing signal soon enough. And I had to retake the test. And so everything in life is a test. You know, getting into college is a test. Getting out of college is a test. Dating my wife was a test. And, you know, at every test, you have to achieve. And I've been asking myself, what in the Bible and where in the Bible does it give us inspiration for dealing with the tests? And I found it in 1 Peter chapter 4, where Peter is writing to the church, several churches in the diaspora, and he's telling them, you know, there are fiery tests which you are undergoing, and don't be surprised. Why are you surprised at these fiery tests? he said, these tests, and I'm paraphrasing it right now, these tests are only made to make you stronger. And the tests that you are going through are similar to what Jesus Christ has gone through. He died with these tests. And he went through this fiery ordeal. And you, if you are to see Jesus and to benefit from the blessing of Jesus in eternity, you've got to deal with this. And for the early church, the tests that the church was facing were critical. They were absolutely critical. They were physical tests. You know, people were being crucified. Some people were being beheaded. But there were also emotional tests. And the emotional test is the early church members are asking hard questions of God, a spiritual test, asking, if I have given my life to Jesus Christ, if I am faithful to Christ, then why am I suffering? Why am I being crucified? Why am I being whipped? Why am I being shut out? And frankly, my friends, these are the kind of questions that Christians are facing even today. You know, I go to church, I pay my tithes and my offerings, I support a ministry like Nick Hood's ministry, but even so, how come I'm not living better? What am I doing wrong? And why does God not see me for the good that I'm doing? And what Peter would say to us is, you know, why are you surprised at what you're going through? This fiery ordeal is only made to prepare you for this kingdom which is coming. And then, reading between the lines, what I get out of the words of Peter is, if you and I are to survive this fiery furnace, we've got to be positive. We've got to be patient. We've got to be focused. And no matter what happens, we've got to not quit until the end. We've got to go all the way. And so let's break down those points. We got to be patient. Let's say if you are going through a fiery ordeal right now, you've got to be patient. And what does that mean? To be patient, does that mean that I just roll over and suffer because I can't get a job? Do I roll over and suffer because somebody else is mean to me? Because somebody doesn't recognize how good I am, how smart I am, how committed I am? Is that all that to be patient means? No. To be patient is somebody who can endure. But we don't endure just for the sake of enduring. To be patient in a positive kind of way means that we have to always be thinking and ask ourselves, how can I get out of this? You know, how can I flip this negativity into something that's very positive? What can I do to flip this script so that it has a good ending? And so to me, patience and positive work hand in hand together. You can be the most positive person in the world, but if you're not working for good, if you're not working for a great outcome, then your positive thoughts don't mean a thing. You can be patient, but if you're not positive, your patience doesn't mean a thing. And so to me, reading between the lines in Peter, I would say that if there's got to be a happy outcome, you got to be patient. You have to be positive. You have to be focused. Now, why is it important to be focused? Because if you're not focused, you're daydreaming. If you're not focused, you may miss what God is trying to tell you all along. And so you have to be focused. You have to clear out all the clouds from your life. And I try to do that. You know, I realized in my youth that I wasn't focused. When I was playing music. Well, even before playing music, I played a little football, both in Little League and early in high school, the 9th grade. And I was always daydreaming about the games. You know, in Little League, it was a Saturday game. In high school, it was a Thursday game. And, you know, I was JV. And I was a quarterback. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But I loved it so much, I didn't want to focus on mathematics. I did okay with English. I did great in writing stories, but I really was not focused. And by hook or crook, as I got older, I realized that I had to really settle down and cast out the distractions. And what were the distractions? They were everything. You know, in the 9th grade, actually it started in the 4th grade, I was introduced to music. First the trumpet, then the trombone in the 9th grade. The music teacher told me my lips were too big to ever advance to be a good trumpet player. And he suggested that I learn how to play the trombone. And so I said, okay. He said, I'll give you a trombone and I'll teach you how to play it. In hindsight, I think the band teacher just wanted somebody to play the trombone. You know, not everybody wants to play the trombone. And I fell in love with the music. Now I'm playing the harmonica because I don't want to go in the pulpit with a big trombone. But I realized that I had to focus. And so now when I'm writing a sermon, but back in college, when I wanted to really focus on studying, guess what I turned off? The music. And why did I feel like I had to turn off the music? Because I wanted to focus. And what was clouding my focus with the music when I was doing my homework? Everything from the melodic structure of the songs on the radio, the chordal progressions on the radio, the resolution of the melodies, the resolution of the chord structures. You know, I was thinking about all that kind of stuff. And, you know, it's hard to do your homework and be thinking about music at the same time. It's hard to do your homework if you're thinking about playing football all the time. And so, as an adult, I realized I had to cut that stuff out. And in cutting it out, it made me a more productive person. And so I want you to think about this as you think about your own struggles that you're going through. When you think about your family issues, when you think about your personal issues, your health issues, I want you to ask yourself, can I focus? Am I positive? Am I productive? Am I patient? And most of all, am I giving up? And a lot of times in life, success is determined by simply staying the course. I'm going to come back in a minute, and I'm going to tell you a couple stories that are true stories, and in my own personal family life. And I want you to think about your own life, and can you keep the focus? And are you quitting before your time? I'll be back in a minute.
America used to be considered a godly country. It doesn't seem to be that way to me now. And I don't mean to be disrespectful or anything, but it's so many things they're okaying for the wrong reasons. There's not godly reason. People need to really open up the Bible, the Bible, and look in it and really get it into their heart. And this, the way Reverend Hood is doing this is a comfortable way. It's not forcing anything on people. It's a comfortable way and a loving way for it to continue to move in that direction.
The way Reverend Hood presents it, you can understand it, and it makes you want to delve into the Bible even more so that you can see more, because it seems like the program goes off too fast. We need the bread of life.
We really do.
These days, we need it more than ever. And Reverend Hood's ministry on TV is giving us our bread.
Welcome back. Today I'm talking about being patient, be positive, be persistent, and most of all, never ever give up. Be focused along the way. And it's so important when you feel like you're going through a test. I had to believe somebody turned on this program today who's got a test. For one person, the test is a test of health. For another person, it's a test of you've got your health, but you don't have the job that you want. You just don't have enough money. Even in your retirement, you're looking, at other people and you're wondering, how come I can't get better? How come I don't do better? And that's a test. And what Peter tells us in 1 Peter is that look at Jesus as a stone. Jesus says, the stone that the builder rejected, the builders hath rejected, hath become the cornerstone. And he takes that from the Old Testament. But he saw himself as being a stone that's rejected. Peter, maybe 60 years after the birth of Christ, somewhere in that range, Peter is ministering and he's writing, and he refers to Jesus not just as a stone that we build our lives on, but he calls him a living stone. This is what is a living stone? It's a foundation, that you can build your life on. It's the truths you can build life on, but it's living in that it's a breathing entity. It's something that is fluid with your life. So just as you have a test on one level that when you're a child, and as we get older in life, the tests become different. It's no longer the test in school, but your test may be, how do I pay for a mortgage? How do I pay a car note? How do I pay for a college education? How do I function as an adult, particularly when things are difficult? And Peter is telling us, he's encouraging us to reach for that stone. Everybody needs something you can build your life on. And one of the problems, quite frankly, my friends, for many of us, is the stone that we reach out for is a stone that's not a living stone. Rather than a stone of foundation, it's a stone that's like an anchor that will drag you down to the bottom of the sea. If your stone is drugs, you can only go so far. If your stone is trying to get by ripping off somebody else, that's only going to take you so far. It is not a living stone. If your stone is a series of failed relationships, if you go from woman to woman, man to man, job to job, you can't build longevity. And if you can't build longevity in life, in anything, you're only going to go but so far. And so Peter says, do not be surprised at the test you're going through. You're no different than anybody else. You have tests. I have tests. And at every stage of life, one of the things that seems to be the same is the test. Now, the tests may differ. The kind of things that stressed me out when I was 7 or 8 don't stress me out anymore. But the stresses at 74 are a lot different than the stresses at 7 years of age. But it's all good. And one of the things I love about getting older in life is that as I've gotten older, my faith has matured. And as my faith has matured, it has given me the strength to feel like I can really make it. A week ago, on a Saturday, my wife and I flew. We took the 7:30 in the morning flight out of Detroit to Atlanta. We rented a car, drove. I thought it was only 2 hours away, but we drove about 3 hours to get to a little bitty town in the country of Alabama, near Montgomery, but not next to Montgomery, called Marion, Alabama. Now, Marion may not mean much to you, but part of the reason why we were in Marion, was the main reason why we were in Marion, was that a friend of mine who I met when I was a student for the ministry in New Orleans in the summers, he was what would he be? The grandnephew of my godparents in New Orleans. He and I lived at their house for 2 summers. The 2 summers I was in divinity school, and the poor guy died. Craig Moore is his name. And I wanted to be there for Craig's funeral. His wife asked me if I would co-officiate the funeral, and I was honored because, one of my heroes, Andrew Young, gave the eulogy. And even though I've known Andrew since I was an infant, he and his brother and his father were the first male role models I had in my life outside of my own dad. And so, my dad ordained Andrew into the ministry in New Orleans. Fast forward 20-some years, Andrew ordained me in Detroit. And so we're all close in a wonderful kind of way. And I just really was excited that I could share the pulpit with him. The church where we had the funeral was the First Congregational Church of Marion, Alabama. And that may not mean much to those of you who are looking at this, but Marion, Alabama is historic in the civil rights movement, in that some people say that really the struggle that took place in Selma on the Edmund Pettus Bridge started in Marion, where Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed. And, the people organized in Marion, it ended up going to Selma, and ultimately with Dr. King, they ended up going back over the Edmund Pettus Bridge a second time from that bloody Sunday, and they walked all the way to Montgomery, Alabama. And so it's historic. But my church in Detroit was founded by 9 people from Montgomery, some of whom had their roots at that little church in Marion. I'd heard about the church in Marion, probably visited the church in Marion when I was a little boy in New Orleans, but when you're a little boy or a little girl, there's only so much you remember. And I have no recollection of the church in Marion, but I wanted to see it. And so, we went there. I was 5 minutes late, driving 3 hours from Atlanta to get to the church. And I was so glad that they waited for me. Then when the service was over, we hung around talking with Andrew and others. And then we raced back to Atlanta and barely made the plane so I could get back to church on that Sunday. But I was thinking about it. There's another part of that church story. And the other part is that in 1879, a school grew out of that church. The school was really, organized by white abolitionists from the North, but there were black people, these Southerners around Marion, who physically built the school. And Julian Bond's father, Horace Mann Bond, wrote a doctoral thesis saying that in the 1940s, there were most of the black PhDs in America had been educated at that school. That's where Coretta Scott King was educated. Gene Young was educated there. But why am I saying that? I'm saying that the people who built that school survived tremendous tests. And they did okay. I learned this for the first time the other week when I was in Marion, that the school they think it was burned by the Ku Klux Klan, but the part of the school that they burned was the teachers' college. The school, at some point, for years, they'd educated children going all the way through college and high school, but it wasn't until the school decided that they wanted to better the lives of black people by having a special portion of the school dedicated to teacher education. And the local people were indignant that these black farmers had the nerve to think that they had the right to train their own teachers. And so they burned the school down. When the school burned down, the teachers' college, the state of Alabama helped them relocate to Montgomery. And if you go through the history of Alabama State, University, you'll see that that's where the teacher college grew out of. But it started in Marion, Alabama. Now, why am I saying that? I'm saying that that's an example of people who had a tremendous test in life. I think about the story of my own family. My great-grandfather was a runaway slave. My great-great-grandfather was a guy named William Hood. My great-grandfather is Nicholas Hood I. My great-great-grandfather was a slave owner and named William Hood. According to family legend, my great-grandfather and his little brother just simply were tired of being beaten. And one day they ran away from slavery. Now, I don't know if it's true, but they claim, this is what my eldest uncle told me, he claimed that my great-grandfather and his brother made friends with the bears out there near Lexington, Kentucky, and that they found out that the bears like sweet potato pie. The night that they prepared to run away from slavery, they asked the women slaves to make them sweet potato pies. They fed the bears, and the bears protected them and gave them safe passage to freedom. Now, I told him, I said, Uncle, that's the most fantastic story I've ever heard in my life. But the point that my great-grandfather was telling my eldest uncle about these sweet potato pies is that they had to go through a lot to be free. But as it turned out, my great-grandfather died in, Indianapolis, Indiana. He was a seller of clay works, and his life turned out okay, even though he started as a slave. The point being is, where you end up can be a long way from where you start. And if you are suffering today, watching this program, feeling like you're going through the test of life, just remember my great-grandfather, a runaway slave. Think about Jesus Christ and all that he went through for your salvation. You think about Jesus. You think about people like the runaway slaves. Think about the people of Marion, Alabama. And you realize that God is with you no matter what you are going through. Thanks so much for watching. God bless. Look forward to seeing you next week. And I'm praying for you.
We hope you've been blessed in a powerful way. Just knowing you took the time to watch today's broadcast is a great encouragement to Pastor Nick Hood. If this broadcast has been a blessing to you, we ask that you mail a tax-free donation to Nicholas Hood Ministries at 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
And the point that I'm making is that in everybody's life, at some point, there's a plan B. God is talking to us every step of the way. God is trying to show you something every step of the way. When things seem to be going wrong, that's God's way of opening another door. I am convinced that God has been directing me every step of my life.